It is my great pleasure to introduce today's webinar speaker, Gayle Corrigan. I'll say a few words about Gayle. We met actually several times at several events, and it was very heartwarming to see Georgian wine, which was donated to several Ukrainian events, and we were very grateful for your support at U.S.-Ukrainian Veterans Summit and Gala, but also at Ukraine Action Summit back in April 2024, a couple of months ago, when we had a great event at the Ukraine House. And so Gayle and her company has been supporting many activities and causes, and not only with wine, but other initiatives as well. And Gayle comes from, so she got her MBA in accounting from Boston University. She has held various roles as CFO, VP, director, and the chief of staff of different types of corporations here in the US and abroad. She also was involved in several municipalities around her state of Rhode Island. And most recently, she is directing her own staffing and consulting business, and we'll hear more about it. It's interesting that Gayle probably will tell more about her journey, but I just want to say a few words that her journey to the world of wine was inspired by her experience in a summer abroad program back in 1989. And that's, a couple of decades of your love with, I guess, with Georgian wine and Georgian country and traditions, but also with Ukrainian traditions as well. And since 2020, when she co-founded a company called Brave Selections, she was importing Georgian and Ukrainian wines around the world, including the US. And since the full-scale invasion, Gayle really has focused on importing Ukrainian wine, beer, and ciders. And she used her pre-war inventory to support so many Ukrainian charities. As I mentioned, she was supporting our activities as well. So we're very grateful for you to do so. And as for many of us, a mission for Brave Selection, her company is to support the Ukrainian economy, introduce very delicious, extraordinary wines from Ukraine, and not just wines, but also craft beers and ciders, and also to and I hope, Gayle, you can probably tell us a bit more. For even I'm Ukrainian, but I know some of the wine history, but maybe not as well educated as you are about the history of winemaking in Ukraine and the rich history of Ukraine, winemaking in Ukraine. Most of us know about Crimea, but there are so many other regions in Ukraine that are very also have very beautiful wines, and we hope to hear more about it. So again, thank you all so much for coming, and I will now give it to Gayle, and we're very grateful and honored that you're here with us. And this is an interesting topic. Very, I think this is a bit, of course, we all think about what's happening in Ukraine, and we're always preoccupied, but we just really want to take our minds a bit off and venture somewhere else, such as wine industry, which is a great topic for a summer day, a hot end of July, a hot day here in New York City. I'm in New York right now traveling, but it's a great topic to talk and think about how we're going to sip wine later on today, or some probably can have it with lunch right now. I envy those of you who can have a sip of wine right now. But Gayle, the floor is yours. And again, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Marina. It's my great honor. This is actually my first webinar, so bear with me on this. Let me see. I'm sorry.
No, we can see your screen.
And there's I'm sorry, just a little technical difficulty here.
No worries, just take your time. I know your first webinar, it's always a bit challenging. Oh,
okay, there we go.
Yeah, terrific.
Okay, so as Marina said, pretty much starting from the first anniversary of the full-scale invasion, I made a decision that the Ukrainian wines that I had in stock, which at that time was probably the largest collection outside of Ukraine of Ukrainian sparkling wine, that they would go not for sale, but for donations to help various causes, and also my stock of Georgian wine. So you might have seen me, and if you have an event and you want to do something, please contact me. But I'd like to start this webinar with this photo, and you might be wondering, like, what does this photo have to do with Ukrainian wine? So I had written this webinar and I'd gone through all the things that have happened, and some of them gloomy. And like Marina said, when I saw this photo, there was something in it that really struck me. There were 2 times in my life where wine has had profound impact on me, and my career and my career choices. And the first was in the Soviet Union in 1989, having that first sip of Georgian wine from these very kind Georgian students who were putting on a feast. But the second one actually happened on March 4th of 2020. And at that time, I was at Vine Expo in New York, and I just happened to have a few minutes to look at the venue, and happened to be going by a stand, and a woman called out to me in Russian, and my colleague said, "That woman's speaking to you in Russian. Would you?" And I said, "Oh, what is it?" And so we went over there, and they were from Bakhmut, and the name of the winery was Art Winery. It was their first time in New York, and she poured me a sip of this rosé bubbly that had been aged 18 months. And I just remember having that taste, and it was like nothing I had ever tasted before. So from there, even though COVID happened literally a week later, I was hooked, and I was hooked on Ukrainian wine. And so that's it. So anyway, when I look at this picture, I see a lot of things. Not only, like, the woman seems to be like that monument in Kyiv, like was it the motherland, or the Ukraine, the mother Ukraine, and she's throwing the bubbles into the future. And the future is filled with joy. It's filled with children who are the future. But behind her is this absolute, this building, which is very, very raw. And to me, that symbolizes everything that is either in the past or everything that needs to be overcome. So to me, this was just, it just told me everything and called to me about everything that is about Ukrainian wine today. So the photographer actually is Ukrainian. And this photographer who took this picture actually had been taking pictures for about 25 years. And he decided that he was very much into Ukrainian wine, and he wanted to go and take pictures photographs all the Ukrainian wineries, or as many as he could. And he actually, to do so, to understand more about wine and winemaking in Ukraine, he actually kind of set up in his garden a winery in 2019, and actually grew grapes and created wine and did this kind of thing. So I decided that we would, as we discuss the state of Ukrainian wine and where it is and where it's been, that we would use his photographs, and then we'd choose. He also had a short interview in a blog, and we'd use some of his words, but we would tell a few stories, some of his stories, his thoughts, but we'd also use these photographs to tell the stories of at least one winery. And the one winery is one that we actually import right now, and hope that at the next events that we will not be pouring Georgian wine, but we will be pouring Ukrainian wine. And the winery is called, it's Vinhal Akhmatia, but really known for its brand name, which is Villa Tinta. And so the pictures, when you see the winery, we'll be focusing on that. And we'll also talk about the original winery that I met and where they are now. So let me introduce our photographer. His name is Arsen Fedosenko. And here you go. His mission is he wants the world to fall in love with Ukrainian wine through art photography. And in some ways, we have similar missions. We're working in parallel because my mission is I would like the world to fall in love with Ukrainian wine through taste. I would like people to taste it and have that same experience that I had. So here we have, like I said, I'm going to refer to it as Villa Tinta. That's a brand name that they make. And you can see that they're very Ukrainian. And some people, when I first started importing the art winery, the Ukrainian bubbly from Bakhmut, a lot of people said, when they would try, they say, wow, this is amazing. Where is it from? And I would say, Ukraine. And they would say, where? Now, unfortunately, I don't have that problem anymore. Everybody knows where Ukraine is for a reason. But a lot of Americans still don't know that Ukraine makes incredible wine. And the fact is that winemaking in Ukraine is a long tradition. So we all know that Georgia is the birthplace of wine, 8,000 years. Ukraine is pretty up there too. They found amphora and wine making bits in archaeological digs in Odessa region, dating back to 2,800 years ago. And then, as you know, like the Black Sea, Greeks were there. Then the Romans had settlements along the Black Sea and Crimea. And then, of course, during the Middle Ages, as religion took hold and there were monasteries, winemaking was transferred all throughout Ukraine. By the time of the 1800s in the Russian Empire, several Russian princes had their estates in the territory of Ukraine. So they would have it in Crimea or in Kherson or along the Black Sea. And they were going to France and saying, well, we could do the same thing here in Ukraine. And this is where you had the first sort of European Western winemaking happening. And in fact, they did so well that in 1900, a Ukrainian wine from Prince Trubetskoy winery, a Riesling, actually won the Grand Prix in 1900. When the Soviet Union came in, of course, that's very many sad stories there, and wine was one of them, of course. And what they did, the Soviets, is they really said, okay, they wiped out these estates and wineries, and they said, we're going to collectivize everything and have these great kind of wine factories. And because the part near the Black Sea, the shore was so flat, that they were able to plant, and the soil was so fertile that they would just plant rows and rows and rows of vineyards, and they would use tractors. And it was really quantity over quality. So unfortunately, from having a high of Ukrainian wine being considered like some of the best in the world, within decades, it went to the low of Ukrainian wine being considered inferior and plonk. So, and that happened pretty much throughout the Soviet period. And then, of course, the second whammy was the Gorbachev anti-alcohol campaigns in the late 80s. And these, they actually ripped out about a third of the wine stock of vineyards in Ukraine. So just to kind of give you a visual, these are the areas of the traditional winemaking regions. And you can see in the very, very west, you have Zakarpattia, and a little bit on the Romanian border. And near Moldova, you have the Odessa region and Bessarabia, Mykolaiv, Kherson, Crimea, of course, and Zaporizhia. So traditionally, those were the main wine growing regions. To the north, actually, it's been happening more in the last since independence. You were getting other regions, and also because as the climate was getting colder, warmer in the south, you were getting different types of grapes being grown to the north. But of course, Ukraine gets its independence in 1991, and it ushers the new era of Ukrainian winemaking. So a lot of the collective farms, all these like wine factories, some of them are still happening, but for the first time, individuals who maybe worked in those entities, they were allowed to actually form their own wineries. And in fact, Villa Tinta, it's a second generation, and their father actually formed one of the first family wineries in the newly independent Ukraine. So that kind of thinking in terms of family-owned craft wineries, actually throughout the 2000s, by the 2005, say, there were about 50 of them, and today there's probably about there were about over 180. So things have really moved with craft winery, trying to reverse that quantity over quality to make it quality over quantity. But the occupation of Crimea in 2014, it was a serious loss, not only for all of Ukraine, but specifically for the winemaking region and the winemakers. About 40% of the grapes historically had been grown there, and they were either annihilated during battles, or they were just frankly just stolen by the Russians. And some of the bigger wineries, or the craft wineries, they were just subsumed by the Russians in Crimea. But it really pushed, everything has a little bit of a silver lining, because it really pushed these craft wineries to work together and to develop more in the regions outside of Crimea. And they started actually going externally at this time out of Ukraine to different types of competitions, to different types of markets, and looking at export. And then, of course, it's February 22nd. Since the Russians have come, I could tell you more stories, and maybe for another day, about the tragedy that has happened to Ukraine and the winemaking industry. But I just wanted you to know that right now, of the about 180 wineries that before the invasion, about 100 still exist and are in production. And so you can see the extent of the Russian occupation. And of course, you had Crimea, but you can see right here in Kherson, it's kind of split along the Dnieper, much of Zaporizhia. But we do have, Mykolaiv, the Odessa region, and Zakarpattia. So this is, again, photo of Villa Tinta as it is. And you can see that it's intact. And that's not to say that they don't have some issues that they deal with daily. They do, and we'll talk about those as we go along. But you can see that it's very beautiful. The land, that's a lake. It's Ukraine's largest lake. It really helps the grapes The grapes are very healthy. And so nature doesn't care about war, and nature is continuing to grow. So grapes have a magical ability to fill places with new meaning, to be a stimulus for the economy. And let's talk about Ukraine's grapes for winemaking. So they have all the noble grapes. For whites, you're going to find a Chardonnay, you're going to find Sauvignon Blanc. You're going to find those things that are very common to the Western world. You're also going to find some things that are a little bit more less common, but they are common in Ukraine, like an aligote. It's a white grape. It's very fragrant. It's actually one of my favorites. And there's a lot of white wines being made with that. With the reds, the same kind of thing. You have kind of your standards, Cabernet Sauvignon, your Merlots, but then you are going to have grapes that actually don't exist anywhere else outside of Ukraine. And here they're called local white. And you have a Tetli Karuk, which was potentially might have come from Turkey, but it's only made in a certain place in Odessa region. The same thing with Suk-Kolomansky. Suk-Kolomansky is a hybrid grape that was the Soviets and the Ukrainian wine institutes were actually creating different hybrids in the 1940s. And Suk-Kolomansky is absolutely one of my favorite whites. It's just something unexpected. It's fresh. This is the kind of wine that if you're on a hot day, this is exactly what you want. It doesn't have the heaviness of a Chardonnay, but it has a little bit more character than a Sauvignon Blanc. So it's just something really special. So if you can ever get it, or when it becomes available all around America, in fact, this is the #1 white seller in that I have anyway. For the local reds, you're looking at the most famous one being Odessa Black. Odessa Black is something really special, and it's a cross between Cabernet Sauvignon and a Teinturier red grape that was a hybrid itself. And so it's really black through and through, but it has a really nice light. It's like a light mid kind of taste flavor profile, and it can be aged in oak extremely nicely. So over time, my creative focus from leaves and berries shifted to the wine grower and winemaker because their work is decisive in the quality of wine. I agree with this statement completely. But unfortunately, we are a lot still stuck on the leaves, because one of the biggest problems in Ukraine and the wine industry right now is the lack of labor. As you know, many people left. Many people are volunteered and went into the war, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So there's a huge labor shortage all around Ukraine, and of course the wine industry is not immune from this.
Can I ask you, Gayle, a quick question?
Sure.
Just maybe give you a little time to breathe. This is very interesting. Maybe you mentioned, but I probably missed it. In terms of the percentage of vineyards that are now on occupied territories, such as Crimea and others, what's the percentage-wise in terms of vineyards and accessibility to those vineyards for winemaking in Ukraine? What's in occupied, under temporary, hopefully occupied territory versus what's left in Zakarpattia? You showed us the Zakarpattia region. We also know Bakhmut, so Donbass region as well, because the dry climate and the soil that produces very unique type of wine, as you described. Odessa region, of course, we all know about about those. But just percentage-wise, in your opinion, what is under occupation now versus available?
Okay, so let's go back to the first occupation of Crimea in 2014. At that time, Ukraine lost, just losing Crimea, Ukraine lost over 40% of its vineyards. And for instance, Bakhmut is actually an industrial center, and they didn't actually grow grapes there. Their vineyards, or Art Wineries vineyards, were actually all in Crimea. And so then they lost all of that. And so they had to source their grapes from actually one of the places they sourced their grapes from after 2014 was Villa Tinta, this winery here. And they
so they basically so the wine came from here.
Pardon?
So you're saying that where's that vineyard that the Bakhmut winery sourced again?
In Odessa region.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So after Crimea, because not only was, say, for instance, Art Winery, like a lot of wineries were either had their own vineyards in Crimea, or they were located in Crimea, or they were supplementing their own vineyards with grapes from. That's a very common thing. It happens in California. It happens in all wine. They'll purchase grapes from Crimea. So if you notice that it's like over 40% overnight is just gone. Now you have go forward. So during this time from 2015 to 2022, during this 7-year period, the winemakers are scrambling, and they're using they're planting more grapes. We're in Mykolaiv, Kherson, Odessa. But now here we go again in 2022. And from there, I would say another 50%. So it'd be, I would say right now, you're probably looking, if you include Crimea, you're probably looking at over 60% has either been destroyed, occupied, or just unavailable. So it's quite a big problem.
And there is another question here from Kim Summers. She is asking, is the Sabo winery in Odessa Oblast currently operational? I love Sabo. I think I like wine. I mean, I know my parents, for example, they like cognac from Sabo.
Yes, Sabo is it's owned by a Georgian family. They make wonderful wines. They've invested very heavily. And again, a lot of what I've noticed with especially after 2022 is that all these winemakers and all these wineries are really helping each other out. So they might be under different brands, but they are really working in cooperation with each other to either which vineyards are doing well this year, which and what's available to make wine. And Sabo is definitely it's an amazing player, and they have actually one of the few they have actually some of the few plantings of this Tetli Kuruk. So if you want Tetli Kuruk, pretty much you have to go to Sabo, or sometimes Sabo will share some, and you can get it under another brand. But that's a very rare one. It's really another incredible wine. So yes, they're still operational. They're doing very well.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Another question comes from Gabrielle. He's saying that he's based in Copenhagen, Denmark, and connecting today from Geneva, Switzerland. First of all, thank you for the information. I didn't know that Ukraine produced wine, and I consider myself quite knowledgeable in wine. Is there a specific reason why the Ukrainian wine remained under the radar pre-invasion?
I'm sorry, why
the Ukrainian wine remained under the radar, so basically not known to mass wine enthusiasts, I would say.
Yes.
Even pre-invasion, I don't think many people knew about Ukrainian wine.
Right. And I would say the reason was because, again, going back to the Soviet period and what they inherited from the Soviet period, where it was quantity over quality. So it was really considered, if people knew about Ukrainian wine, they would consider it, there were some exceptions, of course, with exceptions, it was considered low quality. So they weren't out there. And again, it was only after independence where these independent wineries, these family wineries were beginning. And of course, it doesn't happen overnight. So we're really getting traction, right, you know, in the right before 2014, and then you have a hit. And then of course, you're getting a lot of traction right before 2022 and the full-scale invasion. And then of course, now you have this. But the good news is that Ukrainian wine still exists. The wineries where we're going to talk about where they are producing wine in the last 3 harvests from 2022, 23, and from all aspects, the 2024 harvest, which will be in another month or two. All 3 harvests have been just exceptional. For the Odessa region, for the Kherson region. And again, don't forget, some of the wineries have moved up toward Kyiv in different areas up not just on the Black Sea coast where the traditional ways are. So it really is, despite all the adversity, and it's kind of been handed that wall, that very bad wall of history from the Soviet period, it's really the time for Ukrainian wine to shine.
Mhm. That's great. And actually, a related question from Sam Butler. He's asking, what is the impact on investment in the wine industry in Ukraine, given, of course, the current instability?
Of course, the impact on investment, it's very low. And what they're trying to do, and we'll talk about it more at the end, but what they're trying to do is to sell their wines and to export their wines so that they can reinvest into the economy, sell more wines, and keep on investing. But it is like, we will see that there's a lot to do.
All right, thank you. So this is it for this round of questions. Well, I'll interrupt some at some point again.
Okay.
Gayle, can you please go ahead with your wonderful presentation?
For some reason, this is, okay. So going back to arson, I want people to believe my photos, to feel the peculiarity of Ukrainian wines. Our wines are not like Tuscan, Herat, or Bordeaux wines, but should they be like that? And I would argue no. And so again, these are all from Villa Tinta. And one thing about Ukrainian wineries, for the most part, it's all handpicked. All the grapes are handpicked. And there is a massive focus on sustainability. Because again, a lot of these wineries that are post-Soviet, they're started by families. And families are looking not at the first generation or looking at, okay, how much are we doing tomorrow, but they're looking into the future. Again, looking at those bubbles and those children at the end of it, because it's not about them, it's about the kids and the kids' kids and the kids' kids. So it's really a generational approach. So they're not using a lot of pesticides. And when you go there and you see them, you know, maybe things aren't like perfectly without weeds or things like this, but they're very natural. And they really do care about the environment. Now, one of the things that they can't afford is certification. So to be certified organic, so they're growing, for instance, Villa Tinta is they're using organic methods, but they don't have enough money to, and even if they did, for the international certification teams to come into Ukraine, it's probably not something they're going to do. So right now they're kind of caught in this little trap where they can't say that they're certified organic. but they are using very traditional methods of picking, of growing, of pressing. They did during this period of time, once became, they were massive investments in equipment. So a lot of wineries do have, the mid-range, the larger family wineries do have very new equipment from France, from Germany, winemaking equipment, stainless steel, using the kind of the best. They were able to do that because they came in not during the 70s or 80s, they're coming in the 2000s. So they're using extremely good equipment. In terms of the testing and the quality, they are almost fanatical. And when I'm importing, you have these sheets of exactly, the composition, the sulfites. They don't, very, very rarely are adding additional sulfites. So this is a very, very quality driven wine. Again, trying to get over that in the past where all Ukrainian wine was considered of low quality. And packaging. They are, unfortunately, one of the things that happened in March of 2022 was the largest bottle manufacturing plant in Ukraine was shelled and destroyed completely. And so some had to go to different packaging, but again, they really worked as a collective in terms of sharing bottles that still existed, trying to get bottles. Labels is only where there might have been 5 label companies in the past before the full-scale invasion. Right now, there's like really 1.5. So all these things have to be taken into consideration when you're trying to produce and trying to import. Ukrainian wine should be known all over the world, not only as a product, but also as a cultural phenomenon. So talking about how do people know about it? It is, here we are trying to import it, and imports into America, we'll see in a minute, have been slow for various reasons. But again, all the things that come into not only just making the wine, but importing it, the bottles, the labels, the labor to package the wine. And here we have some of the new things that are coming out. So these are, if you can look in the background of this photo, you see bag and box. These are boxes. They're just plain cardboard boxes. And because they didn't have bottles, they had to pivot and said, well, how can we get our wines out? And they said, okay, we have boxes and we get these bags. And so one of the things, as I was talking about the next Action Summit of what I'd like to do is when they moved to this, I said, that's it, no more Georgian wine at the Ukrainian Action Summit. We will have Ukrainian wine, but to get it here, we don't have bottles, so we will do 10-liter bag and boxes. And so I'm happy to say that available to the Action Summit and available today is actually 10-liter bag and boxes. The wine is absolutely fantastic. It's 10 liters is roughly a 13.33 bottles and about 60 glasses or 62 glasses. So really a fantastic thing to do if anyone has any sort of events or any big parties or church groups. I just really it was really important for me that Ukrainians had Ukrainian wine to drink instead of buying, what was it, Yellowtail? Yeah, no Yellowtail. So it's been a really wonderful thing, and it's great for the environment. And the wines, once you open it, it's good for 30 days, at least 30 to 45 days, just as fresh. So without the packaging nightmare. And it's just kind of an example of something that Ukrainians are doing more with less.
Gayle, and actually you mentioned Ukrainian Action Summit, Ukraine Action Summit, and the registration just started. And I'll put it in the chat for people who would like to attend. It's a great event. And again, Gayle and her company was supporting us previously with Georgian wine, and I'm very happy to hear that this time it's going to be Ukrainian wine, which I think people will enjoy tremendously. Again, because of the limited supplies and the quality and the uniqueness of Ukrainian wine. So that would be terrific. I will put the registration link in the side in the chat. So for people who are in Washington, D.C. area or who would like to be part of the advocating initiative for Ukraine and focusing on talking to a representative. It's a great event. We'll have again a reception at Ukraine House, most likely on Tuesday, and then you can find all the information on the website. And also visit, I'll put it in the chat as well, for those of you who don't know our organization, visit unitehelpukraine.org. We have a lot of events that are happening in DC area and around the country. So please follow us there. And Gayle, thank you so much for mentioning it. I was like, this is great. I'll let people at the American Coalition for Ukraine know that you're going to be supporting us again. So thank you so much for that.
Perfect. So here we are. This is we have to update this information. This comes from the Wines of Ukraine, which is a kind of a trade organization. And you can see that USA ranks third. I mean, in general, things have grown since 2021 to 2022. But there's just a lot more, Romania being number one, Great Britain being down there. But I would expect in 2023 and 4, one of my goals is that the United States becomes a great importer of, or the number one importer of Ukrainian wine. So we're going to pivot a little bit away from arson and talk about some of the tragedies of the Ukraine, what's happened in Ukraine in terms of the wine industry. So Eric Asimov in June of 2023 actually came to one of our first events in Rhode Island, the first event I had with Ina Walker, who's in the Women's League, and we decided to use the Ukrainian wine I had and to have an event to mark the first year of the full-scale invasion. And Eric Asimov actually came and tasted the wines and was very impressed. And he eventually wrote an article, and it was all about the politics involved. And he's saying, throughout history and even now in politically unstable regions, autocrats seek to control wine. For many people, it's worth defending. And one of the things when the full-scale invasion first happened, there was a prohibition. So wine couldn't be sold. And one of the things that the winemakers did is they actually started creating with the wine bottles they had. They didn't know that, hold on to them because the wine factory is about to be shelled. But what they started doing is making Molotov cocktails. But in terms of controlling wine, it is part of the Russians' goal is to control wine. It was one of the reasons for taking Crimea, and another one for taking Bakhmut. Art Winery had been in Bakhmut, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But and obviously we know what happened with Bakhmut. And one of the things that's probably not as well known is that Prigozhin and the Wagner Group was given 2 things and was told 2 things: that he should go and take Bakhmut, to get Art Winery, and to take Soledar, and he was given the salt mines of Soledar. So there is this with the Russians. It's not just about taking land, it's also about taking industry away from the Ukrainians. So right before the full-scale invasion, Art Winery was the largest winery in East Europe. They had been started in 1950 by Stalin as a response during the Soviet Union, as a response for the French having sanctions against the Soviet Union for not paying the war bonds. So Stalin said, okay, well, we'll make our own Champanskoye, you know, and actually called it Champanskoye, and had his oenologists scour the Soviet Union for the best place that would meticulously be almost exactly like French Champagne in terms of the microclimate, in terms of you know, how it was being made. So they found these gypsum caverns in Bakhmut, and they set up, it was called Artyomsk at that time, and they set up this winery. And at its heyday, they could make 28 million bottles a year. And it was all done in the strict accordance to how champagne was made. So the traditional method, everything made in the bottle, the sparkling, the second fermentation, all these kinds of things. The other thing, if you're doing traditional method, the yeast dies, and you have to get the yeast out. So they do this thing called riddling, and all riddling was actually done by hand. And it was all 236 feet or 70 meters underground. So it was actually the world's deepest underground winery. It was about 60 acres. And quality was #1 on that one. So this was kind of a little bit divergence in the Soviet system, because before it was like Ukrainian wine was not very good. But here, this was meant really for the party elite. And so it meant to compete with champagne. So when Putin said, well, Champanskoye or champagne is ours, it's not the French, what he was referring to was actually this exact champagne wine made in Bakhmut. Before the full-scale invasion, there were 500 people working in Bakhmut, and the company itself had a little bit under 1,000 employees. So we know that sometime in March, Prigozhin got a hold and was able to enter Art Winery. And in May 21st, 2023, the Wagner Group sent some of their correspondents to actually see what was there. And they took pictures and videos and showed them throughout Russia. So you can see what this is what Bakhmut is, or pretty much today, if not worse. And then underground, they found about 6 million bottles still there.
Quick question, Gayle, you said how many bottles?
6 million.
6 million are still underground.
Yeah, about.
And are they accessible or are they intact or accessible? Do we know? So the thing about, you see these bottles are aging, and champagne ages, it's the longer it ages, the more kind of complex the flavors become. So there's nothing wrong with these bottles, but to get them from something that's where they are now to something that you'd want to drink takes about 2 weeks. And you just can't take these. Now you need equipment, you need people, you need equipment, people, you need just a whole production facility. Again,
remember, there were 500 people working here, and now they're all gone. Now the Russians, it's still there, but as you can see, Bakhmut is in no, you can see it right here, where it is today. You can see before that was Art Winery, and remember the 60 acres of caverns are below that, and now you can see that it's pretty much been annihilated. Anything above. I've heard, speaking to some people, that it's being Art Winery, the caverns right now are being used as a field hospital, and they haven't done anything with the bottles too much because like there's too much going on. So there is this hope of the return without a doubt, and it's alive. But at the same time, we have to move on.
Yeah, and I have a couple of quick questions that are kind of following what I just asked. There was one question from Sam Butler. He's asking, was Ukraine able to evacuate some of the bottles before the Russians overran the cellars?
Great question, Sam. In fact, we're going to answer that right now. So one of the things about, I mean, importing is just not only making the wine, but you also have to tell the story of the wine and what has happened with this wine. And so here's the story of what happened. And the thing is, we can't ask them how we got it here because they just can't tell us. But they had to do it. It was part of failure wasn't an option. This bubbly was seriously, and remember, this is what they did save things is what I'm going to say, but it's what they saved was very important for them. And they kept it secret. To this day, I can't tell you how many were smuggled out, where they were smuggled to, because if they told anybody, the Russians might have bombed it, because this specific bubbly was really considered by the Russians and by Ukrainians to be a cultural treasure. I can tell you a little bit about how it got here, which I'll show you in a video. So basically, they were able to smuggle wines out. And in fact, when we were recently at, we were helping another event called Borderlands, and we gave a toast with Art Wine. And at the Borderlands event, there were many Ukrainian soldiers who had been in Bakhmut. And we gave the toast. And right afterwards, we gave the toast with these bottles. And right afterwards, one of the soldiers came up to me and said, "That was me. I'm one of the ones that smuggled that out." And it was just, we had heard about it, but to actually meet a bona fide bubbly smuggler, and he was just, I had no idea that it would come here to America. And this makes it all worthwhile. So Art Winery did smuggle out an undisclosed number of bottles. But they don't have, it's limited, obviously. And there are only 6 types of bottles that they were able to smuggle out. And they decided to, they couldn't send them everywhere. So they decided that they would be for a limited amount, would be for domestic consumption, and that they would split exports to America and Japan. So if you want a bottle of this Bakhmut bubbly, you have to be in Ukraine, Japan, or America. And in America, you can buy it online, actually, at artwine.com. And there are limited amounts and limited types. So for instance, they were able to rescue, one of my favorites is a sec or a dry. It has a slight sweetness, and they were able to rescue 23,000 bottles. That's it. And when they're gone until they get back to the 6 million. For other ones, they were only able to rescue 4,000 bottles, especially the rubies. There's a ruby brut that is one of my favorites as well, my favorite ruby. And they were only able to rescue about 4,000 bottles. And so I wanted all 4,000, but they said, no, you can only have 2,000 because the Japanese want the other 2,000. So we only have 2,000 bottles of those. And then the probably the most rare is it was their flagship wine. It was aged for, it was winning competitions right before the full-scale invasion. It was a 60, aged for 5 years, a brut nature, so no added sugars. It's incredible with, like, say, oysters, or it's just very, very classic. And I believe there's only about 1,800 bottles of that they were able to rescue. So going back to arson, so recently he had some Facebook posts, and one was in June 2006, June 6th, 2024, I'm sorry. And I just thought this really spoke to me as well, about what we're doing, to be in the open, to accept and let go of someone else's pain, stay focused, earn the trust of the interlocutor. Remember everyone you talked to for the last time and their dreams. I speak almost daily, definitely weekly, but sometimes daily, to my Ukrainian colleagues in the vineyards. And I told Konstantin or Kostya Tintilov, who's the commercial director, one of the 2 brothers, the second generation, that own Villa Tinta Winery. And I said, you know, what is it that I asked him, you know, what kind of challenges he had, and but what is it that you're hoping for the future? And he came back and said, this is what he wrote to me. We dream wines from Ukraine will become popular all over the world, and hope that the window is not closed yet for us. And we just keep on working for this future to come. So it's hard not to be inspired by this every day. And so the company I had was actually called Saperavi USA, and it was really about the Saperavi grape. But through this experience, really shifted focus, and the company is now called Brave Selections. That's a honey badger, which is the most brave and kind of badass animal in the world. So that's our logo. It's not a skunk. And I really do feel like we're importing courage in every sip. And as we talked about, it's not just wine, it's also the stories around craft beer, craft cider, like all the amazing beverages that Ukraine has to offer. So these are some of the, and we'll be growing, but these right now are some of the products that we have. And so we are an importer. A little bit about us: we're an importer of wine, beer, and cider. We have our world headquarters in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, with an office in Houston, Texas. We're women and minority owned. And it's really important for us that the proceeds from our sales help Ukrainian families preserve and rebuild their wineries. We have a partner, a leg that's called Rebuilding Cellars, which we'll talk about shortly. And the second part of this Facebook post from Arsen was doing everything so we know the heroes and not forget the enemies. And that is one of the reasons why we created Rebuilding Cellars Ukraine. It's to rebuild Ukraine's war heritage. It's one of our missions. And our mission is to help Ukrainian families preserve and rebuild their wineries during war. And we have 3 projects going on right now. And one of the things is actually the biggest problem that I faced in the last few years doing this is actually just Americans not knowing that Ukraine is has great wine, has great food, any of this. So one of the big things that would help the economy in terms of winemaking and these families is if Americans know that they exist and their products are great. So to that end, we really support 2 projects. One is called Ukraine Tasting Freedom, and it's a 5-part episode docuseries featuring Chef Anna Voloshyna. And it's like an Anthony Bourdain. It's going to be like an Anthony Bourdain style travel log where she goes back to each region and actually pairs wines with Ukrainian foods and talks to people. So we're fundraising for that. Another one is Wounded Land 2. There's a Ukrainian director who did, the cinematographer who's done Wounded Land. It was a small documentary about an hour long. Right at the beginning, they were filming the wine industry, and then they just happened to be there when the full scale invasion happened, and it's just unbelievable. It's a time and a place. So they would like to kind of revisit and do Wounded Land 2. The one I want to talk to you about today is kind of the one that's closest to my heart. And it's called Volunteers With Corkscrews. I'm actually wearing the t-shirt. And it's when the full-scale invasion happened, a lot of not only winery workers, but sommeliers, people in the hospitality industry, they volunteered and went to fight, and they kind of created this this informal group called Volunteers with Corkscrews, and it's to support them, but also, unfortunately, to support their families when they are killed in action. And here are some of the sommeliers and winemakers who are no longer with us, who are our heroes. And I'm sad to say that Arsen Fedensenko is one of them. 4 days after he wrote that Facebook post, he was killed by a Russian bomb on the front line to protect Kharkiv. He was 46, and he's survived by his wife and 2 children. And so I just wanted to leave you with one of the last things that he said. And just to say thank you for having me. You can follow our work on Bubbly Smugglers. That is mostly about the work that with art wine and how it was moved and saved. Brave Selections, we've just started it. You can purchase the art wine with proceeds going to Rebuilding Cellars, or you can donate directly to Rebuilding Cellars with any of those 3 projects. So if there are any questions, I'd like to hear them.
Gail, thank you so much for such an interesting presentation. Very touching story, and our hearts go to those winemakers and so many other brave Ukrainian soldiers who lost their lives. And we know that so many of them were really prominent businessmen, college students, professors, you name it. And so Ukraine will be hurting mostly from those lives that are lost, who definitely were contributing and could have contributed even more to a prosperous, independent Ukraine that we all wish, that the victory is here and Ukraine wins this war, and then we can start rebuilding. But one thing that we can never rebuild, of course, are those lives that are lost. So our hearts are with them and their families. There was lots of interesting information that you shared, and we have a couple of questions, and I know we're running out of time. So we have Daniel Franco. He is from Oakland, California. He's asking, so forgive my lack of knowledge here. Once imported to the States, can it then be sent easily to the states like California, or are there distributors needed?
That's an excellent question, and I work on this all day. So for the art wine, the six types that were saved from Bakhmut, those are available online. You can buy them, and it's like we do have the 3-tier system, but for the art wine for now, that is available, I think, in 47 states. And so you can buy it online. They ship it to you. You have to be 21. They do all this compliance work. It's through a third party.
And then related, I'm sorry. And related question, maybe it's a related question that you can answer as well, from Scott Fox. Do large companies act as importers and resell to restaurants, or is it done another way?
Okay, so the art wine, because it's so, let me just finish the art wine, because there's so little of it available, it just made sense that you could sell it online. So I went through doing all of that online. Normally, like, so for instance, you want some of that Sud Polomansky by Villa Tinta, and it's like, you really want that in your glass right now, tonight. So normally what you would have to do in America is a 3-tier system. You would have to, I would be the importer representing the producers, but then I have to sell to a distributor. And then the distributor sells to a restaurant or to a liquor store. And then of course, every single time there's like, you know, the price goes up and up. So one of the things we've been really trying to do is keep the prices reasonable, so that more people can enjoy Ukrainian wine. So for instance, like if you have a bottle of Ukrainian wine, but it's going for $40, there's probably not a lot of Americans who will like give it a try. So one of the things that for me as an importer was what I really try to do is to keep the price like under 20, without a doubt, and if possible under 15. And that's why like the bag and box is really important, and maybe do a 3-liter, 5-liter, 10-liter. But to answer your question, so in terms of the rest of the portfolio, so for a long time I spent time trying to get the art wine here, which was very difficult. And then I started working with Villa Tinta and some of the wineries, Pravda Brewery. We have the Putin Huilo beer, which is amazing, and another one called Punisher, which is fantastic. So and the cider, of course. So what I am actively doing today and every other day from now on is finding those distributors to take it, either in New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island. Like Rhode Island, I am a distributor, but small state. So the answer is, if any of you know distributors that would like to carry this either in California or any state you're in, let me know. But in the meantime, we will be working daily to just sell, get this to distributors, so that they can sell to, let's face it, probably more boutique wine stores and maybe more restaurants that would really want to carry like a very specialized wine or beer. That being said, we're closing in on New York, and I believe within a week or two, Veselka, the infamous, and not only infamous, it's just legendary Ukrainian restaurant in New York will be the first to carry Pravda beer and Villa Tinta bag-and-box wines and the ciders, the yeastless ciders. So please look out for that.
Yeah, and then there's actually a very similar question. Any wine is shipped to the UK or at some point?
So UK, actually, I think it's because of proximity. So if you look for Ukrainian wine in the UK, you'll probably find a lot more of it in the UK than you will in America. Now, this is the still wines. In terms of the art wine, unfortunately, it's only America, Japan, and Ukraine to get that art wine because there was just so little of it. And they made the decision to go with the importers who imported before the war, which happened to be me.
And then there was a similar question from Scott Fox about Total Wine. We know they also distribute a lot of
yeah, so they're a retailer, and so getting it into Total Wine is always like kind of it's kind of the holy grail. So but you still need a distributor to get you still need a distributor, so the distributor will get it into Total Wine. But we're working on that as well, although I believe that a better place, personally, I believe a better place for these Ukrainian wines is actually Whole Foods. They're more in that, they really are like more in that kind of quality, where Total Wine it's a great place, don't get me wrong, but it's like kind of has everything in between. And these wines are, when you taste them, they're probably more like the Georgian wines versus more of like more of a commercially mass-produced wine. So they really are kind of craft.
So we're out of time. Unfortunately, we're almost. It was such an interesting presentation, and I'm very happy to see that our audience was very much engaged, Gayle, and lots of interesting questions. One thing that I want to leave the audience with, and Daniel Franco just mentioned, if you can go back with your slides and leave this quote from Arsène up again, so we remember him and everything that he did for the industry, because those images that we saw from Arsène are just amazing, and his legacy will live on and his art will live with us. And I hope that because of his work and the amazing work that you do, people will know Ukrainian wine and buy it, support it, and we're really looking forward to seeing Ukrainian wine in many stores here in the US and around the world. And again, my huge thank you to you, Gayle, for being here, supporting us, supporting Ukrainian winemaking industry, and having a great impact on those who are in Ukraine right now and who have very challenging conditions to continue producing high quality wine. And I think this is this is a great one. And I'll just quote it from Arsène: "I want Ukrainians to be associated not only with war and pain, but with hard work, culture, and love of life." We'll have a minute of silence, and I just want you all to remember Arsène and his images that Gayle, you shared with us. Extraordinary, and all of those winemakers and other Ukrainians who left their jobs, left their successful careers, and went on defending democracy and freedom of Ukraine. Gayle, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I've learned so much about wine, Ukrainian wine, and we should know more. but it was great to hear the story, and I think it was very touching to hear that at the U.S.-Ukraine Veterans Summit and the gala, you actually met someone who rescued some of that wine that is now available for all of us. So thank you all so much, and thank you all for coming. Come back to our next webinar, which will come again at the end of August. Thank you all. Keep in touch. Subscribe to our newsletter so you will know more about our activities. And I hope, Gayle, we will collaborate on many other events again. Thank you.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.